All right, hi. Welcome to another edition of Jet Setting. Today we not with Ted Wyman, but we got Postmedia's Calgary Flames beat reporter Wes Gilbertson here. How's it going, Wes?
Big shoes to fill today.
Yeah, literally and figuratively, I guess. Right? Yeah. No, it's good. The Flames, the Jets, the Nashville Predators, all in this kind of three-horse race now for this final wild card. All three, well, two of the teams for sure could probably still make some inroads into their own divisional standings. But I'm just curious, big win for the Flames on Thursday night, 7-2 over the Vegas Golden Knights. Comes off the heels of losing to the Arizona Coyotes in overtime on that road trip. But Wes, can you just give us an assessment overall where you feel the Flames are at this point, and do they have the chops right now to kind of make this late season push with 13 games left?
It's been sort of a roller coaster ride here. When you say where the Flames are at, it's like, oh, they're out, count them out. Oh, hang on, never mind, maybe they can still get in. It's been an inconsistent season, to say the least, for the Flames, and the way you teed it up sort of sums up the season. They go and lose to a rotten team in Arizona. It's not like they got goalied. I didn't think they looked very good in that game. Then they go into Vegas, a place that they'd actually never won a hockey game. They were 0 for 8 or 0-7-1 previously at T-Mobile Arena, and they win 7-2 and look really good doing it. And so it's a Flames team that kind of continues to confound a little bit, and that's what makes it so difficult to figure out their playoff chances. As the Jets were stumbling and bumbling a little bit there, the Flames weren't gaining any ground because they kept losing to these teams that they needed to beat. They just lost to the Anaheim Ducks. Their record against non-playoff teams is not good, and you're going to lose a few of those, as the Nashville Predators did on Thursday to the Chicago Blackhawks. But it's been one of those seasons that if we get to the finish line in 13 games and the Calgary Flames are not in, it's going to be really easy to go back and figure out the reasons why. They've struggled against non-playoff teams. They can't come back in the third period. They never seem to win in overtime. I think they've lost 14 in extra time now.
Right.
I'll have to double check that. I'm getting my numbers
But
mixed
a lot.
up. But
yeah.
They just, there's all these reasons their record in 1-goal games, partially because of their overtime struggles, isn't good enough. And so there's all these reasons that they'd missed the playoffs, and yet here we are with 13 games to go, which includes head-to-heads against both the Jets and the Predators, and they're right there knocking on the door. They're 4-1-1 in their last 6, and quite frankly, they're suddenly playing some pretty good hockey. So I don't know. I've counted them out. I've counted them, not back in the playoffs, but back in the race. I guess today's a back-in day.
Yeah, fair enough. Looking at the schedule, obviously a big game against Dallas on Saturday at home. But you talked about the teams not in playoff spots, and they've struggled. You look at the rest of Calgary's schedule for a large part of them. They play Anaheim, San Jose, Vancouver. I think next month, just looking at it, it's a bunch of non-playoff teams too. It looks like their schedule getting out of this week and next week, once they're out of that, it looks like, the strength of schedule will be really good. But from what I'm hearing, that's maybe not going to be the case, or do they just need to rise to the occasion? Because when I think of the Calgary Flames, I think of a team that, here we go. This team has a lot of Stanley Cup winners on. You got Tyler Toffoli, you got Milan Lucic, wait a long time ago. You have Blake Coleman, who won it with Tampa, and then obviously Nazem Kadri, who won it last season. Exactly. So it seems like this team does have the veteran experience, obviously, of Daryl Sutter as the head coach. Can this team kind of get it together? But in spite of the inconsistencies of this season, have you seen anything? What have you been seeing in the room or just hearing? Does this team seem to have do they know that the moment's there for them, and do you think that they can kind of capture it?
Yeah, I think they realize the moment's there, where I was laughing the other night, and maybe laughing is not the right way to put it, but after game 68 of 82, a loss in Arizona, they're talking about, well, we still need to play a full 60 minutes. And I'm sure fans at home and Daryl Sutter, the emoji with the head exploding, like that
Yeah,
must kind of sum up Daryl Sutter's mood a lot of nights. It's been yeah, they realize the opportunities there. Sometimes I've wondered if all the experience and all the talent has worked against them, in the sense that there's been this sort of feeling like everything's going to be okay. We're too good to miss the playoffs, and yet I would say in the last month or so there's been a real realization of, oh bleep, we're in
yeah,
quite a pickle here. And maybe it's going to be too late. The friendly Manitobans are letting them hang around. There's lots of reasons. I'm sure you have the same discussions obviously there in Winnipeg. There's these teams have more often than not, it felt like, been trying to play themselves out of the playoffs. Somebody's got to get in. And yeah, I think it's there for the Calgary Flames to seize. It feels that way. And yet, you're trailing the Winnipeg Jets by 3 points. You have, you're giving up 3 games in hand to the Nashville Predators. So I'm sure if you go look at the odds this morning, they would still be the longest of the 3 to actually get in. And is it too late for them? I'm not sure it is, but just hanging around will only do for so long, and then you finally have to sneak in.
yeah. I mean, you say that about the Jets, and it's interesting because this team sort of same way. Like they were so consistent in the first half of the year, and in the second half they've just taken a nosedive. I mean, they played 500 hockey. They've losing to they lost to the Sharks. They've lost to some bad teams. They played really well against Carolina, but then they can't win. They can't get the goals. They played well last night on Thursday night against Boston. But it's just costly mistakes, puck management, and it was interesting that you said after game 68 they're talking about playing a full 60 minutes. I mean, that's sort of the thing we're getting here in Winnipeg too. It's like puck management issues. Yeah, playing a full 60 minutes. Just lines getting benched. I mean, Mark Scheifele's line was benched for 12 minutes in the second period a couple games ago in Carolina. Do you get the sense in Calgary, or just like, is the leadership that those guys that have that do you feel, I mean, just in the room and all that stuff, I know they've been on the road here, but do you feel like those guys are taking that role and trying to guide this team? Because I feel in Winnipeg, some of the veterans here, I mean, Nero Niederreiter came in at the trade deadline, and he's the guy after getting benched, not Scheifele or not Kyle Connor, who's coming out and talking to the media about taking the full brunt of that line. And it should be the veteran players that have been here for a long time that should be doing that. And it was a big kind of story and a bit of a distraction. But do you feel like in Calgary, it is the Toffoli's and the Kadris and that? I mean, obviously Kadri was on the fourth line the other night, and that's not where Nazem Kadri should be playing, or they would want him to be playing. But do you feel like the leadership there is taking the reins and trying to steer this team where it needs to go?
Yeah, I would say so. I think one of the question marks here in Calgary is whether they need a captain. They haven't had a captain since Mark Giordano was claimed in the expansion draft by Seattle.
Yeah.
So there's a question of whether there needs to be that sort of one singular voice that has the last word from a leadership standpoint. But in terms of sort of letting your play do the talking, you mentioned Tyler Toffoli. He had 4 points in Vegas. He's up to 60, which is a new career high. He's their leading goal scorer. He's a guy who's sort of taken the bull by the horns, so to speak. We've seen, and when you talk about accountability, the biggest difference here in Calgary in the last handful of weeks or several weeks is the play of Jacob Markstrom. And Jacob Markstrom has had a grind of a season, way too many groaner goals, not what you expect from a guy who was in the mix for the Vezina runner-up in voting last season. And in this sort of recent surge, he's now started 8 in a row, and he's been really good for the Calgary Flames. And that, when you talk about a leader stepping up, that's probably the first guy I think of. Michael Backlund's been terrific of late for the Calgary Flames. Nazem Kadri gets bumped down to the fourth line, although the way Daryl Sutter used his groups, he kind of played everybody, but Nazem Kadri played a season low in Vegas. 1235 was the final number. And so, that's a message from Daryl Sutter after a really bad giveaway the previous night in Arizona that cost them that, hey, this isn't going to cut it. And so I think the accountability is there. I just, the big question for me with the Calgary Flames is it too late? And ultimately it's up to the Jets and the Predators to probably decide that, because, the Flames are going to need help.
Yeah, for sure. Just to, kind of talk about Daryl Sutter there, obviously, I mean, he garnered national headlines earlier this year with the Jacob Pelche incident, let's call it. Do you feel though that he's pushing the right buttons right now? Because we know that he can also be the guy who maybe pushes the right buttons, but he doesn't get the right response or the response that he wants because of how I don't know, maybe blunt they come across. I don't know how you would describe Daryl Sutter's coaching style, but it's an interesting one. It's very old school. Do you feel that the players are responding to him? And how did Nazem Kadri play on Thursday? I mean, it's those types of things, right? Like you always look for responses when we're seeing it here. We were looking for a response from Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor. We've looked for responses from a bunch of players this year here in Winnipeg. I mean, how is this team kind of dealt with how Daryl Sutter kind of coaches a hockey team?
I mean, Daryl Sutter's style, he's demanding, he's hard-nosed. You go talk to anyone who played for Daryl, there's not a lineup of guys at his office door asking how his day's been. Like he's not.
Yeah.
Daryl Sutter's style isn't that he wants to be your best friend, and I think that's a real grind for some guys. I would say it's probably been a part of the transition for Nazem Kadri and for Jonathan Huberdeau. I think it takes some getting used to, especially probably in the case of Huberdeau. It's been a bit of a bumpy road at times, that's for sure. And so, the one thing you hear or you maybe see, on Twitter is, oh, well, he's lost the room. Like this is 2023. It's not a bunch of guys sitting in the locker room waiting for the coach to come in and give the pregame speech, and that determines how they're going to play. Like I kind of shake my head when I see that analogy, because that's not the way it works anymore. Are there times that this group has been frustrated with Daryl Sutter? I think so. He is. Yeah. I always call him an expert button pusher, and yet there's been nights he hasn't had an answer. It's a team that doesn't have a third period comeback yet this season. It's a team that has sometimes struggled out of the gates, or they've had consistency issues. Those are things that have to fall in part on the shoulders of the coach. So, I don't think they've tuned him out or, locked him out, as was rumored to be the case in previous stops. But, it hasn't been, we talk about Daryl Sutter being able to squeeze every last drop out of a group. That hasn't been the case here in Calgary. And certainly don't take that as me saying this is all Daryl's fault. But, when you go through the list of people whose performance you could question this season, anytime a team is inconsistent, you have to look at the coach as well, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I think we've, in Winnipeg here, fans have definitely looked even at Rick Bowness this season.
Right.
Just given, it's his first year, but there's been times where, yeah, exactly. I mean, you're looking for accountability. Sometimes you're not getting it, and you're wondering where their coach is. One thing that I always have thought, though, at the end of the day, coach can say whatever he wants, but it's up to the players to kind of get themselves motivated for the game. I it's they got to figure it out. They're gonna play, right? I mean, and that's part of being a professional hockey player, any
Right.
player in sports, right? You have a coach, yeah, and they do the X's and O's and all that, and they try and get you fired up and prepared for the game, sure, but it's up to every individual player. That's your job. Your job is to get up for every single game and manufacture your own whatever it is,
Yeah.
yeah, to get going. So we'll end off on this. Dallas Saturday. But more importantly, well, I mean, obviously Dallas in front of you, but if you look at that game, I found in Winnipeg this year, we don't know here, part of the media here, we don't always know what team is going to show up the next night. So the Jets will play Nashville on Saturday, which is a massive game for the Jets. I mean, they can put some distance between themselves and put 6 points difference, changes the math. It does a lot of things if they can win that game. But we don't know which team is going to show up. And so my question is, do you know what team is going to show up on Saturday night for Dallas? Because you talked about those inconsistencies and all that kind of stuff. A big game for Calgary and their chances. I mean, beating Dallas would be big, especially depending on what the outcome is. Obviously the worst part would be, I guess, a 3-point game between the Jets and Nashville. But what is what do you expect out of the Flames, or do you expect anything, or do you not know what to expect?
The way I've put it over and over this year is that the Calgary Flames are predictably unpredictable. And, we're talking about a team that their longest winning streak of the season is 3 games, and they haven't done that since early December. They've only won back-to-back games 3 times since the new year. And so, when you talk about knowing what to expect, it's one of those that you look and say, well, it's a good team coming in, you're back at home, you're 3 points out of the wild card, although that math could be different, obviously, by the time they hit the ice for the late game on Hockey Night in Canada. But
yeah,
it's one of those, okay, well, this is the old cliche, if you can't get up for this one, then something's wrong with you. And yet you probably would have said that last week when they had the Anaheim Ducks at home and they laid an egg. And so with 13 games to go, do I know what to expect from the Calgary Flames? Not really.
Yeah, join the club, man. It's kind of what we're here. I think fans watching this from both sides can kind of commiserate as well, knowing that they're kind of, both these teams seem to be very. It's odd, right? I mean, it seems like the Flames and the Jets are very similar this season. At least in some of the overarching kind of issues for each club. But Wes, no, I appreciate it. It's Wes Gilbertson, covers the Flames again for Postmedia. Happy to have you today, and thanks for doing this, man.